can I also ask you to turn your mics off? That would be good as well. So I just want to say good afternoon. I think I can say that now. And welcome to everyone to coming to our lunchtime lecture, Glasgow Through the Years. We're doing it by exploring archives. My name is Audrey Wilson and I work for the Scottish Council on Archives. And I'm really glad that lots of you have signed up today, and there's lots of faces I don't know and lots of names I don't recognise. And I think that is a result of working with the West of Scotland Regional Equality Council. So that's fantastic. And as I say, today we're going to explore the city of Glasgow, and it has changed quite a lot using archival material. So just before we start, I just want to run through a few housekeeping rules. So we're in a Zoom meeting format, which will hopefully enable you to fully participate in the chat and discussion. The chat button is along the bottom edge of your screen. I think it is on mine anyway. And then you'll see the chat pane on the right-hand side. Do keep your mics off, and you might want to keep your cameras off as well. And that will help us have a really smooth running order today. So after the second talk, we will have a live question and answer session, and you can use the chat box to pose your questions or any comments that you have on any of the talks. We really encourage you to do that. Actually, it'd be lovely to see anything that you want to say. As I said, it is being recorded, so that does mean that anything you put in the chat or anything you say will be publicly available in the future. So I do ask you all to think about what you're saying, and perhaps, you know, be sensitive to other people's feelings and needs, and don't say anything that you might regret later on. We are going to be tweeting. The hashtags, our hashtags will go in the chat room. Please do add your own, and I encourage you all, if you're on Twitter or Instagram actually, or Facebook, please go ahead and let your followers know about today's event. This really could be one of many events, and I would really ask for your feedback in that, and perhaps we could actually all get together in person and meet up in the Mitchell Library at some point and actually handle some of the archives as well. But let's see how we get on today. So let's get started, and the first person we're going to hear from is Dr. Saqib Razzaq from Colourful Heritage. It is a community archive that has just celebrated its 20th birthday, and in community archives that's quite a long time. Saqib is going to talk about the digital timeline. You can find that on their website, and the Bashir Maan Archive, celebrating and preserving the history of Southeast Asians in Glasgow. Thank you, Saqib.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just share my screen. And Audrey, thank you very much for that introduction. Although we aren't as old as 20 years old just yet, but let's hope that we continue our work to reach that milestone. Okay, I'll just share just start the slideshow. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, does that worked? No, not yet. Trying to get a slideshow on 1 second. Sorry, Audrey. It was working a second ago. Slideshow. Slide. Okay, doesn't look like as though the slideshow is working, but can everybody see my slides here? Is that okay? Just we're trying to get this to work. Beginning. Okay. Okay, I'm afraid the slideshow isn't working for some bizarre reason. It was working a few minutes ago. Okay, thanks very much, Audrey, for that introduction. And the picture that I've chosen for today is this lovely image from, it's an image from within the Gorbals. And it's, as you can see, there's a picture, it's a picture of the South Asian group of men standing outside who are also known as peddlers. That's the profession that they were in, that's the job that they did. Now, just to give you a bit of background, the South Asian community moved into the Gorbals, which is where I believe the Jewish community were initially. So there were a lot of other warehouses around about that time from the Jewish community as well. So this image is from about 1953. I'll come back to this image. Just wanted to quickly, for those of you that don't know much about Colourful Heritage, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a quick whirlwind tour. So our aims are to capture, celebrate and inspire. So we capture information from the South Asian community within Scotland, mainly the elders. We celebrate it by making resources, and then we inspire by giving talks and creating resources as well. So one of our biggest assets that we have at the moment is our online video archive, and it contains well over 150 different kinds of videos with people themselves, protagonists themselves, talking about their history, talking about how they came to Scotland, what kind of work they did. They even talk about migration from India to Pakistan. And what we've done is we've interviewed men and women across Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. So again, it's all on our website under the video section. That's our website address, colourfulheritage.com. So one of the other things that we have made with the information gathered from interviews, information gathered from talking to other people, is this resource pack. Now, the resource pack is something that we've made in conjunction with Glasgow Museums. And if we're talking about evolution of identity, you know, the first two are about contribution of the British Indian Army in World War I and II, but number 3, 4 and 5, the third one being one of the yellow shop in the front cover. This shows the evolution of the community in Scotland from working as peddlers right the way through to building, for example, the largest cash and carry within Europe, which was Castle Cash and Carry, down at, beside the Gorbals as well. And then you've got the evolution of politics, you know, how we've gone from having our first councillor in 1936, Dr. Janti Das Agar, to Bashir Maan in 1970, and of course now we have our First Minister. And of course the last book there is all about South Asian migration, so I thoroughly recommend downloading it and taking a look at these. Again, they're on our website on the school section. So one of the items I wanted to highlight today, our other resource which we've created, is something called a digital timeline. Now this isn't what the digital timeline looks like, but that's the address for it there. It starts from 1855, and essentially it documents all of the, not all, but a lot of events that have happened, different various people that have been part of the fabric of Scotland. And it starts all the way from 1855 when Maharaja Dalip Singh came to Scotland, and it goes all the way to 2023 into the present time. So these are just some of the images that you can see in the timeline. You can see this is a new, because we work with Glasgow Museums, we share a lot of images. So this is an image of the Lashkars plaque, which was at the docks, I believe in Govan. Lashkars were the seamen, the Indian seamen that came for work. We've also got in 1897 a picture of Mirbai Vakil, who is the first Indian graduate that came to Glasgow University, and this is courtesy of Glasgow Museum, Glasgow University. And then there's an image, an extract of a peddler's license book, the police register of peddlers getting their licenses. So you can see a whole load of South Asian names, like I think there's one called Hilal Singh, Ali Muhammad, Chandranathan. So there's a variety of different pictures in the timeline. So just quickly moving on, very conscious of time. One of our other resources, which Irene will be quite familiar with, our next speaker, is the Bashir Maan Archive. Now this is situated at the Mitchell Library within the Glasgow City Archives, and it's a collection of Mr. Bashir Maan, who was, it's a collection of his documents, his posters, his election pamphlets, letters, invitations, photographs. Bashir Maan was the first Muslim councillor in the whole of UK in 1970. So a whole lot of his archive is there. And just recently, Irene and I did a talk at the Mitchell, which was really successful, really enjoyable, lots of his friends from the past. So coming back to the picture which I showed at the very start, before I show you that picture again, I just wanted to highlight that that warehouse that was in that picture belonged to these two men called Mr. Tanda, Nur Muhammad Tanda, and Mr. Ashraf. Mr. Tanda came in 1916 and Mr. Ashraf came in 1926. And they opened up this warehouse, which I will show you now. There we go. You can see from this, obviously, the men that are standing outside, but what went on inside this was that this was a safe space for these men. This was a space where they could get together at the end of the day and look at, discuss and talk about issues that they had, thrash out any problems they had, take advice, pick up information for one another, and also a place where they would socialize. They would play cards in this place. They would have tea. At 4 o'clock, I heard that the person that owned this, Mr. Ashraf, his family lived upstairs in the tenement close upstairs, and they would send down tea and homemade sweets and goodies downstairs for the men to enjoy. So we have the interview of Mr. Atta Ashraf's grandson, Zahid Ashraf. So if anybody wants to type, look that up in the video section of our archive, feel free to do so. So this is all from him. He remembers this place as a child. And he said that his granddad was very caring towards these South Asian peddlers because they were people essentially from his own country. He came from India. So many of them were Muslims, they were Sikhs, they were Hindus. And in this picture, you can see you can't identify any of them as being Sikh, for example, because in those days, in order to fit in, you can see from the picture, as early as 1953, the peddlers were outwardly wearing Western clothes. And for Sikhs, I've also heard that they were having to shave off their beard, their hair, cut their hair to try and fit in. So this place also acted as a bank. So they would very often give out items on credit, not, only if they were sold, they would expect payment, otherwise not really. So Mr. Ashraf really helped out the community. So the reason I wanted you to know all about this, and this picture actually beautifully links into the work that he went on to do afterwards as well, and prior to this picture. He also founded the Jamiat al-Muslimin, which is a committee that was formed to try and create a mosque in Glasgow, the first ever mosque. And this is an image of the first ever mosque in the Gorbals, which is in Oxford Street. On the writing on the top, you can barely make out, it says Jamiat Ittihad al-Muslimin. So he was part of this committee. There was about 10 to 12 of them that put in, a fair bit of money in those days in 1944, when they purchased this building, £100 each to get this building. And from that, and I tell you this because from that, I've already talked about Bashir Maan. So that's a picture of him on the right-hand side. This is his very good friend, the owner of Castle Kashinkari. Together, both of them, plus Mr. Shaheen Tufail and many, many others, they worked tirelessly in their younger days and in their elderly life later on as well, for a whole range of committees, and they were taking part in all sorts of organisations. I've already mentioned he was the first councillor. You can see these are some of the pictures from the Bashir Maan Archive itself. That's a picture of Bashir Maan with his friend. They're talking about building, a purpose-built building for the mosque rather than a converted building. You can see he's involved in Pakistan Day celebrations. He's wearing his Pakistani outfit. Again, here he's wearing his very traditional Pakistani outfit. He's meeting and greeting people. Again, this is all related to his identity at that time, in those days, very much Pakistani outwardly. But as you see, as you move on in the years, you can see that he's very much adopting sort of British outfits, coats, jackets, suits, ties, trying to fit in. And, what I find really amazing is this picture here in the bottom left, where you see them standing. The GCM Planning Committee, these are some of the members. That is the mosque that Bashir Maan, along with many, many others, and it was one of the biggest projects that the community ever took in those days in the 1980s. It opened in 1983, which is exactly 40 years ago, pretty much to this date. And this is the Muslim community showing their identity. And just for those of you that can see it in colour now, this is them on the same location in Gorbals, not the same location, very close by to where that warehouse was as well. which shows that, you know, they've come full circle. So they've not moved away from the Gorbals. What they've done is stamp their religious identity, and it was mainly the Pakistani Muslims that managed to gather £3 million to make this mosque. So it just goes to show from humble beginnings to where we are today. And in terms of, just very quickly, the timeline, these are just some of the images from the timeline that I have, and I just picked out, in terms of politics, some of the entries. So you'll see there's a picture of Dr. Janti Das Sagar, first ever councillor of person of colour in Scotland. We have the first ever Muslim councillor. We have the first ever Muslim MP, both of them from Scotland. That's another story altogether. And of course, nowadays we know we've had so many people in the Scottish Parliament. These are just some of them. We've got our first ever Sikh Member of Parliament, Minister of the Scottish Parliament as well. Our first ever Muslim leader of Scottish Labour. We have the head of Labour leaders, Raya Sadiq, and of course, you know, youngest MP, we have got Anam Gesser, and of course we've got Hamza Yusuf. So again, you know, you can pick out these little entries in terms of politics and the timeline. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I can say a lot more, but we'll leave that to questions. So thank you very much for your attention. And I'll pass it back to Audrey.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Saqib. So interesting as usual, and I do encourage you all to go to your website as well to really look at especially the digital timeline, which is so interesting. As Saqib said, please do post some questions in the chat and we can ask her later, or you can unmute and you can ask yourself. So thank you very much, Saqib. Now we're going to head on to Irene to hear from Dr. Irene O'Brien. I've got to remember I'm on a computer. I'm not in the same room as these people. And Irene is going to tell the story of Glasgow with a few images, and I really want to highlight here there are miles and miles of archives at the Glasgow City Archives and thousands of photographs, so we will just get a small glimpse of their collection today. But over to you, Irene. No, Irene, I'm not hearing you.
As Audrey says, I'm from the City Archives in Glasgow. We're based in the Mitchell Library. We're the largest and the oldest local authority archives. And I just want to talk a bit about the history of Glasgow, using a lot of images, I have to say. And I want to just talk about from its earliest times right through to the more current things and things we would definitely recognise. And of course, one of the things that's really important in Glasgow's history is St Mungo. And I just put old and new there. We've got an artist just on the left-hand side. And we've got a beautiful seal there, which is at this moment my favourite object in the City Archives. It's a seal, a very crude seal of St Mungo, just a head and shoulders seal. And that was a seal in use in the city from the 12th century. And the thing about it is it's almost certainly taken from the bust, the shrine of St Mungo, which was in the cathedral. And I think the important thing about talking about St Mungo is he's the seed of Glasgow, and very important in terms of Glasgow's history. In particular, in the 12th century, there was a great cult around St Mungo in terms of faith tourism. People had to come and visit his tomb, as told by the Pope, he had to do that. So I just want to talk about some of these things and the development of Glasgow. Okay, so in terms of the city's archives, we have 800 years of the city's history. A lot of that's told through the council's own archives in terms of the corporate records, but we've got very large numbers of private collections. And one of the things that the archivist was very clear right at the beginning, and most archives are very clear of, in terms of the city's history or municipal history, that corporate archives is very important. But we all realise that it's very important also that we can tell the whole story. And to tell the whole story, we need lots of other collections. So the City Archives have got very, very number of large collections. We've got the landed families and estates right across Glasgow and the west of Scotland. We have lots of business records, including shipbuilding. We've got lots of private collections, we've got shops, we've got lots of engineering companies. So it's very large indeed. And those records go back as well from the 12th century to the 21st century. Not only does it tell the story, but one of the things that we need to be very clear that we're doing, we need to be reflecting the whole of the community in the archives as it is today. So we're delighted to welcome archives from across the board, from different groups, different organisations, because that makes the city's history and its archives very rich. So in terms of the city, Glasgow goes from a great commercial city in the 18th century, a very large trading success. It was the centre of the world tobacco trade, and it was a great merchant city. And part of that, and the city's acknowledged that, part of that was achieved through enslaved labour. It then became a really huge city. The size and density of population increased immensely in the 19th, 20th century, and that led to great urban squalor and public health issues. So we've got lots of slum housing, we've got terrible streets and closes. And one of the things I'm going to show the photographs of Glasgow trying to improve public health and improve its housing, which is a big part of its role in the city. So what did it do? It was a very interventionist authority. It acquired acquired powers to intervene. It was one of the most active local authorities, definitely in the UK and probably across the world. So it was doing lots of things, and I'm going to show you some of these things. There's new services, so it's introducing parks, we're getting schools, we've got arts, we've got culture, we've got libraries, we've got the big international exhibitions and the world famous tramways. So what the city is doing is intervening to try and make a difference to people's lives. And of course, with that huge population coming very quickly at the beginning of the 19th century, that's what the problem was. So it becomes a great merchant city, and of course it ends up the second city of the empire and a great industrial powerhouse. And if you just look at the population, you'll see in 1921, it was 1 million, over 1 million people there. It was actually the largest local authority in the UK for a period, because although Glasgow and London's bigger, it was separated into different boroughs. So it was a really important borough, and its records reflect that importance. So we've got two scenes here. Some of you may recognise the top one is Trongate, not as we know it today. We've got the only bit we've got here is the steeple still survives, and we've got a terrible view there, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The best to the worst. So we get a great description of Glasgow in 1726. Glasgow is to outward appearance the prettiest and most uniform town that I ever saw. The houses are faced with ashlar stone. All of them are model, and piazzas run through them on either side, which will give a good air to the buildings, and that's reflected in that top image there. And lo and behold, in 1842, we've got Edwin Chadwick, the great public health champion. It might admit of dispute, but on the whole, it appeared to us that both the standard arrangements and the condition of the population of Glasgow was the worst any of us have ever seen in any part. So a really big slip, and again, that was that rapid industrialisation and huge migration into the city, all congregating around this streets like this here, around High Street, etc. And this is what was happening to the city. So I just want to talk very quickly about some of the things how they did it, but I want to look at a lot of images for you because I know that's what you like to see. So they acquired lots of powers to undertake activities, and they had organised new departments, had officers appointed to deal with a wide range of activities. Many of these were pioneer workers, renowned public health reformers, and one of the great legacies we have of that public health movement is some of the most amazing photographs of the conditions in Glasgow. I will show you, and I did show you a minute ago, the very well-known Annan photographs, the old Glasgow closes, but that work continued. The City Archives are probably getting the range of 1 million photographs. They're not all all of that and all interesting, but some of them are absolutely tremendous in terms of giving you a feel and a flavour of what the city was like. This is a street in Glasgow, but this is one of the most iconic photographs. It's this woman sitting with the milk bottle at the door and living in terrible conditions. There was a huge number of photographs taken for that, and they just give you a real flavour of what it was like to be poor in Glasgow at that particular time. But some amazing photographs that we have. So we of course call Glasgow Dear Green Place, and the first park of course was Glasgow Green, which was founded in the mid-15th century. Bishop Turnbull awarded it to the people of Glasgow. And at the bottom here we've got Botanic Gardens, and here is this one here is, I'm just trying to remember which one it is. I think it is Victoria, it is Queen's Park. So just amazing photographs about all the parks and all the green places that we have. And that was one of the things the city realised. The great public health person, J.B. Russell, decided it was great to have the parks in areas like Queen's Park or Kelvin Grove Park, those big parks which at the time were in the outskirts of the city. He wanted there to be parks in areas where people worked and lived, and so you get lots of other parks developing in the city, and we've got some amazing photographs of them, and some we've got quite recently, but yes, it's one of the most important achievements of Victorian Glasgow. Of course, one of the big issues is housing. This terrible housing, what the Glasgow did, they were one of the only authorities across the world to actually take municipal powers to improve housing. And here we have is the two photographs. One is in Rotten Row here, and one is in King Street. The city improvement was appointed, and what they did was they tried to buy up land so that it could clear, and their whole mission was to clear that kind of high street, that high street and the area around that of its slums. They didn't have do a great job in the sense that it took them a very long time, and the landowners were charging them lots of money. But what happened was they did build model houses, and they gave the conditions. The private sector did it, but they had to build it to these standards. This is Rotten Row and this is King Street. These are houses. This one's gone in Rotten Row, very sadly. They're of the same model. This one here is in King Street, and that building still stands. And sometimes when I'm parking at King Street, I just look at that building and remember that was a great achievement for the city. But there's all sorts of photographs showing what replaced the terrible housing and the people living in them there. And you see all the children living and playing in King Street. But it's worthwhile looking out if you live in Glasgow just to have a look for it. They did a lot of good work, but it didn't impact at all because of the high standard of the houses. Nobody could afford them. None of the poor could really afford them. So that although they did a lot of work, that impact and the huge problem was very little. So I want to just talk about some other really important things in the city's history. In terms of, this is a beautiful photograph, and one of the things I really love about the photographs that it's so obvious, no matter how young you are or how old you are, these pictures just look very much like they were at the time. This is the Hope Street, and this is a tram, and here we have the underground. These were two important successes of the city. It was the first in the world publicly run tramways from the 1870s. They took it over from a private company, and there's a tremendous interest in tramways in the city. So it's really worthwhile checking our photographs, so you'll see huge numbers of these, but there's a big following of them. And it's so great, you can just picture yourself walking up that street because the streets so alike. And similarly, the underground station in St Enoch Square, no longer sadly an underground station. It was opened in 1896, and it was the third oldest underground subways in the world. Only London and Budapest was older than it. And again, we put that on our Facebook, and I suggest you look at our Facebook, which is really successful. We get a reach of 4,500 likes and a reach of several 100,000. So it's really iconic for people to look at those and feel part of all of our history. And these are another amazing sets of photographs. I mentioned that they were really, Glasgow was really active. And what they did in 1914, they applied for further powers to extend the tramway system. So what did they do? They took a lot of photographs to send down with the bill to Westminster to show how crowded Glasgow streets were. And again, although the costumes are different and a lot of other things, the streets are very recognisable. So we've got this one here, and we've got a couple here there. This is Union Street, and you can see how crowded they are and how busy the streets are. In many ways, you can see how well dressed they are. And this one is a beautiful one of Broomalaw. I've just rushed from Albion Street myself there and just past the Customs House, which is the building just there, and which is now a hotel. But again, there's so many of the buildings have gone, but so many of the buildings remain the same. So it's just a great way to actually envisage yourself in historic Glasgow. So one of the huge issues for the city, of course, is providing houses for particularly tourists. Now, Glasgow's got some very wealthy areas. What I'm looking at intervention to try and improve the Improvement Trust didn't make a lot of difference. But what happened was, after the First World War, there was this desire and this political need to actually change the situation of the poorest across the UK. This 1919 Housing Act was a UK Act, notwithstanding that the very famous Glasgow politician John Wheatley had been working in this area for a long time. In fact, it was UK legislation, and it gave a state subsidy. It was very important politically because World War I housing was a key issue for local politics. In many ways, that was why Labour Party was able to emerge and dominate the Glasgow City Council. So under a number of acts, there's various housing developments. And I'm just going to talk about a few of them. One of the first one is this 1919 Act, where we had a number of housing schemes. Some of these housing schemes were very, very high standard. Again, the rent was too much for many of them. This one here is Moss Park. For any of you who live in the city, will recognise Moss Park as one of the most important housing estates. There'll not be many of those still be council houses. And the largest of these estates was Knightswood, and this is just a kind of broad sweep of it. And that was the largest one in the city at that stage. They did make a difference, but what happened again was they had to start to reduce the quality of the housing so that they could build more and people could afford the rents. And there was decades of them Glasgow trying to work out how they're going to house people in proper accommodation. We then get the comprehensive development areas, with various stages in between. That was, we've got the peripheral estates as well, but the comprehensive development areas was terrible clearances from the 1950s and the 1960s. They identified 29 areas for total demolition. And they did have a serious problem about housing. So houses had to be cleared and 60% of the population be relocated. This one here at the bottom is a beautiful view of Pollock Shaws, and that is the town hall just in front of it. It is very clear that that was the one. It had a very big, it had a very much a village feel about it, Pollock Shaws. And what happened, of course, a lot of those buildings were destroyed. It's very sad that actually such Johnston Maxim School, which still was there, I think is about to come down as well. But it was a beautiful village area and they didn't keep any of that. Very little of that was retained. And there's other areas like Anderson. I'm sitting in Anderson myself at the Mitchell Library. So we've got huge numbers of photographs of places like Anderson, Kingston and Townheads. These declined by more than half of the population. But what we will see is, in terms of that, you can look at the streets and see which ones have gone, and it makes a huge difference. But again, recognising them. And I suppose one of the most iconic areas that we have in the city in terms of that big redevelopment is the Hutchison Town stroke Gorbals. And this is a beautiful view here of it, and you can see the flats there. There are wonderful photographs of the new house has been built and the old house has been demolished also almost at the same time. So a great way for you to enjoy the city's history, but also to think that you're part of the city's history and that you recognise that those streets, that the streets we all walk along, that are they're for everybody to just say that this is part of my history and this is part of our history. So that's some of the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of the housing. So I haven't even mentioned all our wonderful shipbuilding, so I'll show you a photograph of it there. I think the important thing, I've said your archives, your stories and your history. The City Archives is everybody's archives. It's certainly everybody's story and it's everybody's history. That's why I want to encourage everybody to use it, but also to contribute to the collections that we have, because that's a really important. That's how we make sure that the City Archives reflects the whole of the community in Glasgow and the west of Scotland. How is it important? It's important because it tells us how we all lived, whether it's in a house in Anderson or in Great Western Road. It shows how we all lived. We've got the school records, so it will show you how you and your ancestors before you actually, which schools they attended and about the schooling. It tells you about the work, how people worked and where they worked. So he'd mentioned the peddler licenses. One of the things we have are lots of like registers of occupations that need to be licensed. And of course, some of those were peddlers, and a lot of migrant communities in different waves would come and they would work as hawkers in the city. It shows you about the leisure activities. So we've got things about parks, but we've got things about sports, etc. We've got huge numbers of photographs, and I think what our Facebook is the most successful in Glasgow Life. And why is it most successful? People can connect, and they connect not only here, but we've got the biggest diaspora audience. And the thing about that is, one of the things is we show pictures of the pubs that people attended, the schools they attended. We've got the records of people in terms of the school registers, but all of those things people can say, well, that was my school. That was where my father worked. I remember walking down the street, and we got all of those types of comments. So that kind of visual impact is absolutely huge. But what's important behind that is the lots of records which give you the context of that and might actually give you the details of your own family or your own friends. We're certainly, in terms of all of this, it definitely is your history and your story is the history and story of Glasgow. I think we all need to feel that that's what it is. We're all part of that history. My name's O'Brien, so my family came from Ireland about a century ago, but we all need to feel that that legacy at Mungo is our legacy. And one of the things I often say, we're all St Mungo's Wains. And I'm going to show you how to contact us, but I just urge you to be think about the archives, think about how you can use it and how you can enjoy it, but how you can contribute to make sure that the stories include the stories of your families and your friends and people that you know as well. So in terms of the City Archives, that's the address there. And we have an email address as well, and our Facebook. I would suggest you look at the Facebook. As I say, it's really successful, but it will show you all those great images of the city, give you a much broader understanding of the city you're living in, and give you a much greater idea about what it was like for your ancestors, maybe in the city 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, or sometimes 150 years ago. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. That was really interesting. So much information. And just to remind everyone that we are recording this, so you will be able to go back and look at the slides again on the YouTube channel, and we'll send them out to everyone who signed up on Eventbrite, because I noticed a few people arrived a bit later. So I'm sorry for all the sort of technical issues we've had there, but I think we're on track now. I've been sort of looking at the chat, and because we're having our Q&A now. Now, if you do want to ask a question, put it into the chat room, but you can also, if you like, using the reactions, you can put your hand up and I will keep scanning, and so will Justina. If you want to ask your own question, we will, you can unmute and you can ask your own question. But while we're waiting for people to maybe put some questions in the chat room, there was one for Saqib to start with. I think that came in, and it was just about, you're not 20 years, Saqib, the Colourful Heritage, you're not quite that old, but what made you start, not you personally, but what made people start the Colourful Heritage Archive? And would you give any advice to anyone who was thinking of doing the same thing?
Yeah, so the Colourful Heritage Project was started by the founder, Omar Sheikh, around about 2010, and I guess from what I've heard from him and from other people that have come and gone from Colourful Heritage is that, you know, they were sitting with a group of friends in someone's house, and they were talking about, you know, there was a lot of funerals in those days, and they were just commenting on how, you know, the elderly generation was just passing away. You know, it's not something that, you know, when we grow up, we see people that are our aunts and uncles. Everyone else older than that, well, quite a lot of people that were older than that tended to move either back to Pakistan and then back again. So we weren't exposed to it as much as we are now, because now that generation that stayed here and made Scotland their home, they're all beginning to pass away. So we wanted to try and capture their stories. You know, when you look around, this was not being reflected in museums or any other space as such, you know. So we wanted to try and capture that in a way that it was the person themselves telling the story, rather than, you know, 20, 30 years down the line, somebody else writing about it.
Yeah.
Which is fair game too. But we wanted to capture the actual stories, the actual essence from the people themselves, or from their relatives, maybe their children or their grandchildren. So I think that's what drove the start of the project in terms of the video archive. But of course now it's more than that. You know, we gather so much information that we can create resources, and that was just some of the resources I talked about. We've got another really fantastic one called Explore Heritage, which you can see it's an interactive map on our website. So you can see different bits of Scotland where there's South Asian heritage, for example, wherever Maharaja Dalip Singh came in Perthshire, or you can see where his items are kept in Edinburgh, or of course the Indian Muslim soldiers buried in a variety of locations in Scotland. But I guess for anybody wanting to create an archive, I would say that you, first of all, I mean, we created a video archive because we wanted this to be something that was accessible for everyone. We wanted it to be something that was accessible for young people, especially nowadays. So all our videos are actually on YouTube as well. So, you know, I guess it's growing according to the era that we're in, you know, because that's what's going to engage the youngsters of nowadays.
Yeah.
In terms of somebody starting their own, I guess you need to know what your target audience is, and, you know, be quite methodical, and, you know, maybe even form some kind of partnership with either Glasgow museums or the archives, or, you know, get in touch with you guys and see if there's anything in terms of even National Library of Scotland. I mean, I know just now there's a new project just started called Tape Letters, and they're going to deposit all of their material into the National Library of Scotland, and that's all about oral histories. Ours are oral and video histories.
Yeah, thank you, Saqib. And it's true, I think what's important is hearing the voice firsthand of people from the community, rather than it being interpreted by someone else. So I think it's compelling. So I think to all ages, not just young people as well.
Yeah. I think it's quite powerful, because you can then, when you hear the voice, you know, and in this case you can hear the voice and see the video, you can see their facial expressions, you can see what they're feeling. Sometimes it can transport them back to a time which is a very difficult time, you know. And I've been in interviews myself where I've seen people just break down or cry. It's quite emotional, it's really difficult, but at the same time they're quite relieved. It's almost as though they get it off their chest, so they're quite happy to do something like this. It's not been easy to try and encourage people, but I guess once you get the first few, then it, you know, other people want to tell their story as well. And I guess the Asian community are quite a humble community. They just take it in their stride and think, you know, what they've done is, that's just what everybody else did in the Asian community, but they don't realize actually that was quite unique, quite special, quite a struggle. all the sacrifices they made.
Yeah. Oh no, I think it'd be great as well, because I know Harvey's with us from the Jewish Archive as well. It'd be really interesting to get some oral histories as well and compare and contrast with lots of different people who are living in Glasgow, because it's so sort of multicultural. It's amazing. But that's another project maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's
Just had
another
another
project.
question, and I think somebody's asking about resources about South Asian women.
Well, that's Mary Morrison. I don't know, Mary, if you want to unmute and show yourself.
Oh, I see her. Hello, hi, Mary.
Hi there. I found your talk very inspirational. Thank you, and it obviously showed the way the men. I mean, heartrendingly for me, the way the men got together and had their niche where they felt comfortable and safe, and you can only imagine some of the responses they might have had. I was wondering if you're doing something similar for the women.
Yeah, so like I said, our interviews are actually, we also try as much as possible to try and interview the women from the community as well. Of course, the women have a different experience because, you know, right about that time that picture was taken, there was very few South Asian women in Gorbals or in Glasgow or in Scotland, you could say. And I know that Mr. Ashraf's wife had come at that time, so she lived upstairs, which is why she would make, you couldn't just go out and buy, you know, sweets and things like you can nowadays, you know, from the Asian shops. So, and also there was the issue of whether it was halal, whether they could eat it or not. So something made at home was quick and easy, and you know, she did this every single day. But in terms of resources, yes, we've got interviews of ladies, and also on our YouTube page, I think on the video section, if you go into Heritage Plus, there's a little button called Heritage Plus. You'll be able to find something called Her Story, so Herstory, and we've got an interview from the first South Asian policewoman in Scotland, Swaranjit Matharu, the first Justice of Peace, Mrs. Prahanda Chowdhury. There's about 5 or 6 different interviews, so they're all just one-to-one histories of ladies. And you can also look up our Colourful Heritage YouTube. If you go to that, you should be able to that should come up as a playlist.
Thank you.
I'll put it in the chat box.
Thank you very much.
I'm unmuting. Thank you for that question, because I know you're really not anywhere close to Glasgow at the moment, are you? Where are you?
I'm on North Uist in the Outer Hebrides.
Yes. Oh, thanks for speaking some Gaelic. Yeah, well, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for your question, Mary.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to carry on in the questions with, it was something for Irene actually, but also Saqib, very welcome to get back to us actually. You mentioned school records, Irene, and I just was wondering if people could use the Glasgow City Archives to look up their family history, and perhaps you have collections in other places that you're connected with that would also be a useful resource for people.
So in terms of family history?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have very large collections related to family history. We have a Mitchell Library family history at the Mitchell, which includes the City Archives, it includes the registrar, so you can do all the births, deaths and marriages, and it includes the library section as well. Without a doubt, our 2 most important collections in terms of family history are poor law records, of which we've got 1 million applications. They go across Glasgow and other areas, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They're so wonderful because they actually describe the daily lives and the experiences of people in Scotland, give you lots of background about who their children are, who their parents. You often get comments talking about their living conditions, and sometimes they're not that great. And the other thing, of course, is very important because we have the burial records for the city. So everybody dies, so everybody in terms of that, huge amounts of demand for that. Our collection is much wider than Glasgow. I saw a note about that. We were once Strathclyde Regional Archives, so we have a lot of that West of Scotland records. We have a lot of those still in the City Archives here. And of course our collect, because we were Glasgow and Strathclyde, the private collections reflect that So some of them are Glasgow, West of Scotland, some of them are national. So we've got records for the co-op right across Scotland. Some of the landed families, we've got the two Isle estates, and we've got quite a lot of other ones in Perthshire, etc. So it's really wide ranging in terms of that. Huge amounts of stuff for family history. There's the schools, there's the peddlers, there's everything and anything about how people live their lives, etc. So it's worthwhile looking at. I'm a great believer in family histories, not just about birth dates and extra other things. It's about how you connect to the individuals and the people that you're trying to discover. And I think things like the Poor Law, that's where they're absolutely the best, because you really can feel for what their lives were like. So it's not just about dates, it's not just knowing when they were born, it's just that understanding of what it was like to live in some of these streets in Glasgow, or to be poor in Glasgow. So that's really important. But as I say, we've also got the landed families, people got land Marquis of Pollock, etc. So all of that as well. So it's a very large collection. We do say that you can do your family history. It's everything from cradle to grave and everything in between, because so many of the sources we have.
Thank you. That's, and also, I mean, just very quickly, there was a question about, is everything online, or would you recommend people to come in and visit the Mitchell Library and access the archives?
Absolutely, everything's not online. I saw a note about the photographs. The virtual Mitchell has got about 9,000 photographs on it. And also the Glasgow Store is a very good site, because it gives you both a lot of images, but it gives you the historic background to it. You can check the virtual Mitchell online, and as I say, you will see quite a lot of photographs on our Facebook, because we are very active, so certainly look at that as well. I'm a great believer in coming in and looking at real archives, I have to say, and making that connection. Do you know, other things are very nice, and we do obviously produce things, and obviously we all use digital. I use it myself, but I just think there's some difference when you come and you actually touch a real archive and experience a real archive. And for me, that's part of the experience of doing any history, or doing my family history, or anything else.
Great. Well,
Can I just add to that, recently we had the Bashir Maan event at the archive, and although I've seen bits of it, but when the bits that I've not seen, which Irene brought out, it was amazing, because there was photographs in there that I'd not come across, and articles about him being in the police, Bashir Maan being part of the police, which somebody that was in the audience was from the Scottish Muslim Police Association. He had no idea he had any connection, so he promised to go back and take a look. So it just goes to show, when you see it in person, it's completely different.
Yeah, I think that's true. And maybe we will have that opportunity in the near future, actually. Before I just finish the questions and answers, I just want to hear from Harvey. Harvey Kaplan, I think you're unmuted.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Thanks. I'm aware of so many parallels from what's been said before about Colourful Heritage. So many parallels with our experience in the Jewish community. We started collecting in the mid-1980s. The inspiration actually came from something called the Gorbals Fair Society, who were looking at the history of the Gorbals, and came across the fact that there used to be a large Jewish community there, and they held an exhibition in 1984 in what used to be Adelphi Terrace School. I got involved in that, and then we sort of exported the idea, if you like, to the Jewish community, who embraced it, and we started collecting. And I think that this was before we had access to a lot of the sort of the computer digital type resources we have nowadays. So a lot of it was very low tech, but our emphasis at the very beginning and right the way through was on collecting, because if we didn't have the material, if we didn't preserve it, it wouldn't be there for the future. And we've been extremely successful in collecting material. I would say that in 35 years or more, not a single week has gone by without material coming in, and it's amazing to see. And also a lot of material has come from the expatriate community, people who come from, who either grew up in Glasgow themselves in the Jewish community and now live in Canada, Australia, America, wherever. The usual story, or people whose parents came to Glasgow as immigrants, but now they live in Australia, whatever. Material comes in from all kinds of places. We also have a big oral history archive, a large collection of photographs. I think it's so important to preserve immigrant history because all of these communities have contributed to Glasgow. I'm sure Irene would agree. You know, whether you're talking about the Irish or the Jews or the Asians or the Chinese or whoever, you know, we all contribute to Glasgow and to Scotland.
Great. Totally agree with you, Harvey. Thank you very much for making that comment. I'm not going to take any more questions from anyone else, but I would just like to invite Anil Singh Bhopal. He's the Deputy Director of West of Scotland Regional Equality Council. Scottish Council and Archive. Been doing some work with you, and this is how this webinar has come about. So over to you, Anil.
Thank you very much, Audrey. As Audrey mentioned there, I work as the Deputy Director with the West of Scotland Regional Equality Council, where in addition to various roles I manage 2 heritage projects, Roots Scotland and the Inclusive Heritage Partnership Project, which I'll speak about in a bit more detail shortly. But firstly, I'd like to thank Audrey, Justina and other colleagues from the Scottish Council of Archives for organising and facilitating today's event. What started out as a simple conversation between myself and Audrey a couple of months ago has gradually grown legs, and it's great to see the level of attendance at today's event, and much of that is testament to Audrey's dedication in getting things organised so quickly. Thank you very much also to Dr. Razzaq of Colourful Heritage for the earlier presentation on the arrival of people from India and Pakistan in the 20th century. My own maternal and paternal grandparents came to Glasgow from Punjab in India in the 1950s and 1960s to settle in the Gorbals and Langside parts of the city. So to have that information showcased was not only really enlightening, but emotional also, and something that I'll go back to my mum and dad and share today, I think. Thanks also to Dr. O'Brien for running us through the history of Glasgow through the ages. I take various forms of public transport during my commute from the south side of Glasgow to the West End on a daily basis, so it was fascinating to have some more insight into some of those streets, parks and places that I pass every day. So thanks very much to all the organisers and the speakers. Just for a bit of background into the work that we do at WSREC, we were established 50 years ago in 1971 and work across 12 local authorities in the west of Scotland to advocate on behalf of disadvantaged groups across all the protected characteristics covered by the Equality Act. And we particularly focus our work in relation to human rights and equality related issues. But in terms of the heritage work that we do, I run a project called Roots Scotland, which enables key stakeholders from the heritage sector to engage with minority ethnic communities to discuss how they can become more engaged with the historic environment in a variety of different ways, whether that's by improving their own work from an EDI perspective, engaging with funders, or showcasing cultural heritage through initiatives like today's. We're also running a project focusing on inclusive heritage partnership that's been funded by the Scottish Government, and it's being run in partnership with Historic Environment Scotland, and that aims to address the underrepresentation of people from equality groups, including those from minority ethnic backgrounds, within the staff, volunteer and board roles within Historic Environment Scotland and across the heritage sector in general. So if you want to find out any more about our work and keep tabs on similar events to today's, please do check out our social media or drop me an email. I'll post that information in the chat. And finally, thanks very much for taking the time out today during your lunchtime to listen to us and all the speakers. It's really appreciated, and we really value your contributions. I'll pass back on to Audrey.
Sorry. Thank you, Anil, for saying that. Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming today. And as I say, I hope we can do more of this sort of thing in the future. I've held you up a bit longer than anticipated, but I think it was well worth it. Okay, bye everyone.